So hello and welcome to today's pastel art classes for beginners. And today's subject is this little owl eye. So this is one that I've done quite a few times in my beginners classes, and it's a really great little exercise, and it just helps you see shapes and play a little bit with some texture. So we've got this beautiful smooth glassy eye and the reflection in there, and then we've also got all that lovely, the feathers around the eye and all the different shapes and textures. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And the first part of our class will be a little charcoal sketch. So if you have your notes there, you'll see that part one is always a little study. And it's just a 10 or 15 minute session where we play around with some charcoal, get familiar with the picture, look at the grid that's on the picture so that you can figure out where everything sits within your page, because grids are really helpful when it comes to drawing and getting your perspective right and your proportions right. So that's how we'll proceed today. So you can see here I've got my art diary. What I'm going to do is just fix up the focus so it stops wiggling around. There we go. That should stop doing that now. Good. So if you have an art diary nearby or a piece of drawing paper, just an A4 sheet will be fine. And that's what we're going to use for this first part of today's class. And the other thing you'll need is some charcoal sticks. So this is a little cheap brand for about $7 or so for a tin of these. And when they're new, they all look nice and shiny. Mine are obviously not new. They come with a foil on one end so that it's supposed to keep your fingers clean, but it just gets annoying because then I can't peel it off to use it. And to start off, we're going to have a longer piece of charcoal today, and then we'll need a shorter piece that we'll be able to use for some shading and blending in some tones and so forth. So a couple of pieces of charcoal. The other thing that you will need is an kneadable eraser. So these ones come in a grey colour and they're square, and then you can actually pull them apart and reshape them and use them to take charcoal off your page and get your whites back in. So really handy things to have. And if you're feeling a bit stressed, it's just fun to kind of squeeze it gently in your hand while you're drawing. It's a nice de-stressor. It also actually helps to clean your fingers, because you'll find after you've been using pastel or charcoal for a while, your fingers get pretty dirty. So these actually help to clean them and keep all that colour into the eraser rather than all over your fingers. So I have my kneadable eraser and a couple of pieces of charcoal. Have your reference image close by. So you can see we've got two options here. We've got a colour version and a black and white version. So first up, we're going to look at the colour version just to get the drawing in place and use that grid. I know I've got a grid on the other one as well, so you could use that, but usually I refer to this one with the grid. Once we've got everything in place, then I look at my black and white version and I do the toning, look at the tones for this part of the class, and that's what we do with the charcoal. So first up, what we're going to do is draw up the same proportions as this picture, which will fit into an A4 page. Rather than filling up my whole page, I'm just going to draw in a little frame like this that's roughly the right proportions or dimensions. For this part of the class, I like to stay a little relaxed, really. I don't really get too caught up in the detail or, you know, getting my measurements perfect or exactly right. This is really just an exercise to rehearse the picture, but also to relax into art mode. And we just want to take it easy and you know, make it an enjoyable process. So draw up your little picture frame like this, and then you might want to use a ruler. It's probably a better option because you can probably get a straighter line. Put a line down the middle like that. If you want to measure it up, I know that's right off. If you want to measure it up, by all means do that. As I said, this is just a rough little exercise to get us into the mood. And you can see I've just used my kneadable eraser then to take off some of the charcoal on my page. So it's very handy. And then you want to do a halfway line this way. And then on the picture today, I've got extra lines on there just to help us figure out where things sit within the picture. So that's my grid line. Your grid line is really helpful because by having a grid line, I can now figure out where the eye is on my page and where all the different shapes are. So I'm going to talk about the shapes now and where they intersect across the grid line. And that's how we're going to get everything in the right spot. So if you look at your picture up here, you can see that across the top left there, we've got like a V shape or a triangular shape. I don't know if you can see that. So across the top of the picture here, it comes down from the center at the top, across that top grid line and down about 2/3 up inside this grid line. So I'm going to say 2/3 on my picture is about there. So you mark in a couple of key spots or locations. So that's one spot. And then I'm going to say that it starts in the center up here. So this is that arced line. It's the brow of the owl, right? But what we're doing is breaking everything up into shapes. So I'm going to just draw this arced brow like that. So it's almost just a pure curved line that runs down that way. And that's this line above the eye. So if you mark your spots in on the edges or on the edges of your frame, and then literally just join the dots with your charcoal and draw a line down through there. And that will be the first line that we're going to pop in. Okay. Now we're going to look at the eye. So if you look at the picture of the eye and you can see where it sits within the grid line. And based on my picture, I can see that this is the grid line here. So the eye sits in mostly this grid segment. It leaks over a little bit into the halfway segment and down, just down below this line here. So when you kind of notice those things, it really helps you to draw things in the right spot. So let's put some markers in. So I can see the top of the eye sits about there. I'm just going to put a little mark there on that grid line where I can see it sits. When it crosses onto this center line, it's just below that grid mark. So we've got this lovely curve that comes around like that. And then I can see how far into this grid line or how far into this segment does the eye come over. So I would say just putting my little charcoal stick there and running it vertically, it's probably about 1/3 of this segment. Yeah, so that's 1/3, that's 2/3. So I'd say it would come in about 1/3. So it's about to there if I break this down into thirds. So I'm going to say it's to about there. And then it crosses over just on this, where these grid lines intersect. There's a little crossover there. See how we're putting some dots in? We're going to join the dots in a second. But just noticing where everything sits in relation to these grid marks. The bottom of the eye, you can see, crosses over this line, so this grid mark here, I reckon slightly more than halfway out from the middle, so about there. So now I've got all these dots in line on my page, and I'm going to join them up in a second. Next thing though, before we do that, is to find where the outline of the eye sits in relation to the edge of my page. So it's about there, inside this segment. So now we can actually join the dots and draw an oval shape like that. So that's a really great way to make sure that the eye gets put in the spot where it needs to be. And if you look at your picture, you can see that you've got it there. So you've got a little bit of it over onto the right of your center line. Most of it sits within this segment here in relation to the picture and the grid. And then we've got a little bit leaking out underneath it. So now we know the eye's in the right spot. Next thing we've got to do is put the pupil in the right spot. Pupil? Yes. never remember if they're pupils or irises. So if you look at the pupil, you can see the edge of the pupil sits right on this centre line here. And the bottom of it, let's put some spots in where it sits within this. So the bottom, I reckon, sits about there, inside this grid line. So I'm looking at the distance from this grid line to the bottom of the pupil. It's about a quarter of this grid, I would say. Just doing that by eye, I'm not measuring anything. If you do want to get very precise with this process, you can measure and you know, make sure you get everything down to the millimetre. The top of the pupil is a little higher in the eye than the bottom, so I reckon it sits about there. It's quite dark in the picture, so it's hard to see, but I would say it sits about there. And then on the left-hand side, how far in does it sit? I'd say about, in relation to this segment, I'd put it smack in the middle of that segment. That's this section here. So now we've got a kind of join the dot situation for our pupil. So now we can, oops, very crooked, wasn't it? Join the dots and make a nice round pupil. It's not quite round, and just tidy it up a little bit. So that's our lovely black pupil, and we'll fill all that in a minute. The other thing on the eye is to notice this outline around it. It's quite thick, but you can see that it's a little bit thicker on the right. So I can see on this side it's thicker, so I'm going to thicken up that line on the right there. Across the top it's thick, but it's narrower, and the bottom is also narrower around here. And then on the inside, so this would be where the tear duct is, because this is the beginnings of the nose on this side. It gets thicker again, doesn't it? And it kind of comes out in a little bump, like a typical tear duct kind of eye shape, like that. So just mark those lines in. So it's a little bit thicker on the right, thinner across the top, and then thick with a little bump on the left there, so that we get the shape of the eye around about the right place. Once we've got that in there, if you want to pick up your short piece of charcoal, so if you've got a fat bit of charcoal, just break it into a shorter stumpy piece. That way you can lie it down on your page like this and use the side of it to fill in bigger areas rather than trying to colour in with the tip of it. It's just more efficient, really. And you can colour in the pupil with your short bit of charcoal. So we get it nice and black. Lovely. Then once you've done that, it's time to look at what other shapes are in this. So I can see there's a shape coming down from the left-hand side, so inside of the eye. See those feathers that kind of fan down, and they go in this sort of shape. I'm just going to draw a rough shape, sort of like a nose almost, like that. That's those white feathers in there. Now I know some of them come down over this dark area, but we'll put those in afterwards. But this is the main kind of shape that we want to draw in that section. Now look around the eye as well. Can you see that there are white feathers around the outside of the eye? So that's these feathers here. So I'm going to draw that shape in as well. And again, with reference to your grid line, you can see that that shape comes up just where these intersect here. We've got a little straight mark that comes there, and then it runs down almost straight down through there on the side, and then it comes down the side of the eye and gets wider at the top bottom right, and then tapers off in towards the eye. So that's just another shape that we can see. And then we've got one more, and then we can start shading. So there's one more shape here, which is like the little cheek of the owl. And I can see there's a triangle kind of shape here, and that's that dark area that kind of disappears into the background. But then we've got this little bump here that's like a cheekbone, and it wanders away into the distance, so you can't really see where the rest of that goes once it hits just before halfway mark. it disappears, so we can't really see that part. So basically they're all the main shapes that we need to have drawn in and have some sort of understanding about. Now we're going to shade in some of the lights and darks with the charcoal, and that will start to give us an idea of the tone. Tone is a really important part of every painting or drawing because it's all about the lights and the darks. So the tone is what makes something stand out. So if you look at the picture of this one, look at the black and white version, and you can see that we've got a really black area in the pupil there. And then we've got a light grey in the bottom of the iris of the eye, but at the top it gets darker because there's shadow there. And then we've got all these lovely white feathers around the eye and above the nose. And then there's a big dark patch up here above the eye. We've got dark around the eye and we've got dark down in here. So without dark, light isn't light, and vice versa. So you really need your darks and your lights and all the ones in between to make everything look real and give it body and texture. So what we're going to focus on now is the black and white version of this. So try not to look at your colour version, fold it over or put it underneath something if that's easier. And we're just going to really study the tones because that's really important. So what I'm going to do with my short piece of charcoal now is just block in or colour in the dark areas. So I'm just going to keep it on its side because I can get it to kind of fill up more space if I do that. And I'm going to block in, fill in the blackest areas. So that's this little section above the eye. You can see it's quite black up in there. And then as we come down inside the eye, around where that tear duct area, there's a little bit of dark around through there. And you can see there's like a line, like a bag under the eye that comes down through there. And we've got lighter feathers sitting on the top of it, but underneath all of that is dark. So the other thing we need to do is be looking at layers and thinking about where does that sit in relation to this, and how can something be light without dark, and is there dark under it? Is that what's going to make this light? So kind of figuring out the layers and the process of everything and how everything kind of relates to each other. So we've marked in those dark spots. Now down under here, so where we've got those lovely little white feathers popping over the top, inside this cheek area, beside what would be the nose, is really dark in there, isn't it? Kind of all dark, and that means it's kind of disappearing off into the distance a little bit. So blacken that off as well. And now that we've got those really dark areas in, and if you haven't got your pupil filled in yet, pop that in now. Now it's time to start looking at the next darkest, or the mid-tones, I suppose. So what we want to do now is look at all the mids and find those. So that's the grey areas that are not white or not black, they're in between. And we're going to start to kind of mark those in as well. And let's start with the eye. So as I mentioned earlier, you can see at the top of the eye, it's darker in the coloured part in the iris than it is at the bottom. And so that's because the top of it's in shadow. It's underneath that little eyebrow. So I'm just going to block in all of that eye with my charcoal. I'm just pressing quite lightly so it's not going to fill it up too much, because I want to make sure that I can either take some of this off or add to it and make it darker. And then if you want to get a finger, we'll be doing this with pastels as well, just blend that around. So if you blend that around in a circular motion, and you'll find the harder you press, the more blended it gets. Just pulling that around like that. And you can see it's all turned into the one grey colour now, hasn't it? So what I want to do is I want to darken across the top here. See that little shadow across the top of the eye? I'm just going to darken that off, and it's almost a stripe, and you can actually see the eyelashes of the owl in there. If you look really closely, it's not as obvious on the colour version, but it's in the reflection. Can you see in the reflection here? You can see some little eyelashes kind of go like that. They're not that obvious, but they're just very, very soft there. And so by making this darker, then what we've put down underneath it is still lighter, isn't it? Because it's got that lovely grey tone. So I've darkened off the shadows, the top of the eye. Now I've lost a bit of the pupil because it's all kind of merging into each other now. So you might need to darken the pupil up a little bit more. Willow's charcoal, this willow charcoal is very soft. So you won't get a very black charcoal with this. It's a very soft charcoal. And if you want really black charcoal, you need to use harder charcoal or pencils. Okay, so see how that's now starting to get a little bit of form on it because we've got this dark above the eye, in the top part of the eye, and then coming down around the side it's dark, and then I'm just lifting my charcoal off and it's getting lighter again. And I've got to darken up the outline again because I lost some of that as well. So you'll find with charcoal and pastel, you'll have to keep kind of touching things up all the time because they kind of smudge each other, and sometimes, you know, a light will go over a dark and it'll be too light, so you've got to come back in and lighten it up. So there's a lot of back and forth going on. Okay. Now, see on the bottom section here of the iris, it's a little bit lighter. You can see that in the black and white picture. It's a lighter grey. I want to lighten that up. And the way to do that with charcoal, if you're working on white or light paper, is to use your kneadable eraser and just take some of it off. So what I'm going to do is just dab it. If I rub it, it's just going to blend and we'll get some off and leave some on. But if you dab it with this, it just picks up kind of what's on the surface, but it still leaves a little bit on the paper. And you'll have to keep reshaping the eraser. So you've got to kind of find a clean spot to dab, because after a few dabs, it gets very dirty because the charcoal or pigment will stick to it. And so you need to knead it. That's why they're called kneadable, because we just knead it all back in again. Okay, so I've dabbed all that off because I want to lighten up just this little section here. And you can see already that that's now starting to look like it's got a little bit of tone or shine to it. And the other way to put shine in, of course, is to pop a bit of light in there. And so usually I'll save this bit for last, but we can do that now. So you can see there are two sections of light in the eye, and the way to get the light back in the eye with the charcoal is to just press on it with the kneadable eraser. So I'm going to do that because up here in this little dark area, just dab it. So make sure you've got a point or an edge on your eraser. You can shape it into an edge and just touch it on and lift off, and that should pick up some of the charcoal and show your paper through to get that white back in there. So I'm going to put a little shine just there, and it's got another little shine sort of running across it, but it's not quite as bright. So then you only need to dab it maybe once or twice with the eraser. You don't want to make it really white. So we're going to sort of save the white for last. There's another little shine over on the right-hand side. So same sort of thing with that. And then a little shine just there. See how that brings that eye to life? It's amazing what a tiny bit of white will do to make something come alive. It's amazing. I love this bit. It's my favourite bit. I usually save it for last because that's when you get all the joy. But we've popped it in for now, so that's great. So next thing, as I said earlier, leave out all the white areas. So where you can see white on this picture, don't put any charcoal there. And I just want you to run your charcoal around on the paper. I know there's little tiny white feathers. We don't need to worry about those too much. We can put those back in with the eraser afterwards. But just run this around, noticing the direction of the feathers. So what I like to do is look at which way something is growing or flowing or moving, and moving my charcoal in that direction. So I'm up in the forehead area at the moment. That's the top left section. You can see there's little dark and light feathers kind of zigzagging over each other, and they feel like they're kind of short, stumpy little feathers, don't they? So I'm going to do short little stumpy movements with my charcoal. I don't know how else to describe it. And what I'm doing is I'm just keeping the charcoal basically on the paper all the time. I'm just doing these short little movements. And where I want it to get darker or blacker in a few little sections, so that that looks like those feathers, I just press a little harder. So it makes a darker mark. And then where you don't want it to be too dark, you just keep it quite light. So up in this section here, I've probably got a little bit too much charcoal. So what I can do is get my eraser and do little feathery marks to try and get some of that off, but also create the feeling or the texture of the feathers. See how I'm just doing these little flicking movements with my eraser. Treat it like a paintbrush, perhaps, if you're used to using brushes. This can become like a paintbrush, and you can actually get a lot of texture by doing different little movements with your erasers. There we go. So that's probably enough, just to give it enough the feeling of, little short feathers that we want in that section there. Now over here on the other side, see it coming out from the eye. What I want you to try and do is put your charcoal stick down on your page like that, and look at the angle of these feathers as they come around the eye. And they kind of all fan out from the centre, from the eye, don't they? So if you pull your charcoal like this, across and out, and what I'm doing is I'm using it on its side, so I'm getting a nice flat mark, but it's kind of an irregular mark, so it's not too hard and straight. And see how that's now starting to give me the feeling of those feathers and the direction that they're growing in. That's the kind of feeling I want. And by pulling my bit of charcoal out from the eye and, fanning it out, I suppose you could say, it's starting to give you the feeling of that. So it's all about the way you move things and the direction and how hard you press, and which part of the charcoal or pastel you're going to put down onto the paper. So now I've done that, I've got all these lovely lines, and because the thing is on its side, if I was doing this with the end of my pastel, I'd have to be doing this kind of thing, which is fine for some things. But in this instance, I just want a softer mark, and I don't want such a regular line. And so by using it on its side, I get a much softer mark, but it's still a line. And I can twist this around and get fine little sharp edges on the edge of my charcoal, because this one's been worn down a little bit. If you have a round piece, so this is another little chunky piece, you'll find as you use them, you get these little sharp edges and flat edges. And so you can kind of vary those around a little bit by sort of twisting it and using the different sides. And it will really help to create different textures for you. Fabulous for things like grass and trees and that sort of stuff. So now I've got all of those little marks in there, I'm going to just put a few harder ones in there, because I can see up in the top right there, it's a bit darker, isn't it? So let's press a bit harder in there and get that to be darker. And then I'm just going to do a few more hard marks through here. And as I'm going, I'm kind of crisscrossing them now. So you can see in those feathers, they're sort of all crisscrossing over each other. Can you see how they're doing that? And so if I kind of pull my charcoal around, so I've still got it on its side, but I'm sort of twisting it around so it's crisscrossing over each other. So it's not all running in exactly the same direction, but sort of just layering on top of each other. And it's that easy to get those amazing you know, feelings of texture and so forth. And they're just big wide marks, so you don't need to, you know, have tiny small marks all the time. You can just use lovely big wide marks. It really helps you to loosen up and relax into your art. I'm just down in this right hand corner now, putting a few more feathery marks down through there. And so you can see now, because we've left those white areas undone, we've now got a lovely range of lights from, you know, and darks. So that's how you create tones. Lovely. So what I want to do now is just show you how to put some of these white feathers back in, especially over this dark spot here. So this will be one of the last things that you would do, because we want to get the light in last. I'm just going to move that mark, take that off, and I'm going to rub this one out as well. So you might want to try and take your grid lines off if they're still showing through, because that can be a little bit distracting sometimes. Just use your kneadable eraser, give them a little rub. Don't worry about getting it too perfect, because this is not the time to do that. We're just relaxing and getting to understand the picture. Cool. All right. So now what we want to do is get some of this white feather to sort of come over this dark area. So I'm going to pull the dark up a little bit higher, just so I can get more emphasis on that. And then we've got this lovely white section here in the front, so we can pretty much leave that as is. And then we're going to get the kneadable eraser again, and you want to shape it so that you've got like a knife edge, a sharp little knife edge that you can draw a line with. And so we're going to do that with the feathers and bring it down from the white area. So you're going to have to keep re-kneading it every couple of strokes, because if you don't, this is what will happen. I'll show you. Put your mark in there like that, and I've picked up charcoal on my eraser. When I put it down again, it's going to leave a mark. So I need to find a clean edge each time if I want to make sure this area stays white and I don't contaminate it with more charcoal. So each time I can do this, and I can just swish it down like that and draw these beautiful feathery lines in over this dark area. So that now brings those forward. They look like they're sitting on top of this dark section, which is what we want. We want that to look like it's closer to us. So it takes a little while to get that happening, because you've got to keep finding clean edges on your eraser. But you get the drift. Playing with charcoal is heaps of fun. I'm really loving charcoal at the moment. So if you do enjoy doing this, then, you know, stick to it with it, because it's such a lovely medium to work with. So as you can see, I'm just creating these lovely wispy feathery kind of shapes and putting all that, putting charcoal back in my white bits, but I can just rub that out now, so it's not too detrimental. And up around the eye, because you can see in this area around the eye here, we've got all these little white hairs that kind of crisscross each other in this outside section. So you can do the same sort of thing there with the edges of your eraser. Just do these little crisscrossing marks. You don't have to even take them all the way over to the side of the picture. You can just do a few, and that would be enough to indicate the texture of the feathers. The other cool option with charcoal is white charcoal. So you can actually get white charcoal pencils, which are the best, and they're awesome with pastels as well. So stick one of those in your kit if you can. And I don't know how well it'll work on here, but white charcoal is also great for getting some white back into things. So I can use that like that to get some of those little crisscross feathery marks in. It's not quite as white as I'd like it to be, because it's picking up, again, see how they get dirty from the charcoal? It's got black all over the tip of it. So I'm kind of making grey more than white, but white charcoal pencils are your friend. They're wonderful things. So I think we might finish up that part of the class for now and get stuck into the colour, because that's the funnest part, I think. But I hope this segment was helpful and really gave you an understanding of tone and what to look for when you're looking for your lights and your darks, and how important that is. It's quite amazing, isn't it, what happens when you add a little bit of a shine to an eye, or slightly soften the edges of the bottom of it. It just makes it look rounder and smooth. So that was that little bit. And I can see it's not perfect, but it will do for a start. Lovely. So once you finish this part, pop that aside, and then we'll get started on the next segment of the class. And the next segment will be quite a bit longer than this one. We'll be drawing this up again, but onto pastel paper, and then we'll be using pastels to find our tones and colours. So I'm going to close up my book and pop that aside. So what you'll need for this segment is some pastel paper, and this is a colour fix paper. It feels like fine sandpaper if I scratch it. Oh, terrible sound. You can hear that it's quite gritty. So this holds pastel really well. There's lots of different pastel papers. This just happens to be my favourite. And it comes in all kinds of colours. So you can get black and white and blue and red and green and everything in between. I picked this one today because I thought it kind of matches our picture quite nicely with the colours. So I'll put that back on the screen so you can see what I mean. So by using a terracotta or a brown or something like this colour, it's going to relate to the colours that are in the image, and might mean that I may not have to fill in the whole lot of the paper. I can actually let some of this paper show through on the painting and be part of it. So that's always a really nice thing that you can build into your artwork with pastels, is just making sure that, well, not making sure, but using the paper colour to help with your art. It doesn't, you don't always have to fill the whole thing up with pastel. So the other thing you'll need is a little board like this. So just a bit of MDF or something like that. I like to tape my paper down so that I don't have to hang on to it. If you're on an easel, you might want to tape it top and bottom or down the sides. I'm just going to pop it on the corners because I'm working flat today, so it's not going to fall off or anything. The other thing I like to do with my tape is just stick it onto my cloth or my clothing before I put it onto my paper. Even though this is 14-day tape, it's supposed to be, doesn't damage anything. I still tend not to risk it too much and get some of that adhesive off before you stick it to your paper, because it has torn before. So pop it onto your clothes or something, and just make it slightly less sticky so it's not going to tear your paper when you take it off. All right, so that's our paper set up onto our board. Next thing you want to do is roll up your grid again. This time we'll actually measure it properly. So on this coloured paper, I could use charcoal to draw this up, and that would be perfectly fine. So that gives me a dark line on a mid-coloured paper. Or I could use white. So you could use a white pastel pencil or a white charcoal pencil. So if you only want to get a couple of pastel pencils, because they are handy to have the odd thing here and there, these would be the main colours I would get. So a black is awesome if you want to be doing fine lines and dark lines. I like this yellow because it's kind of not too light, but it's a good mid-yellow to put in some highlights on things, like little hairs and stuff like that. So again, the fine lines. This colour is a good one because it's a mid-tone. So if I put this on this paper, you won't be able to see it very well. Can, but not very well. So if I was just drawing this up for myself and I didn't need you to be able to see it, I'd probably use this one because it's going to be easier to cover up with my pastels, and it's not going to stain my page too much. And it's also a really good colour for just having a mid-tone for different things if you need a fine line. And of course white. So as I said before, this is my charcoal pencil, but you can get white pastel pencils as well. And white's always great for putting the lights and the dots and the shiny bits in. So for the purposes of the class, I will do this in white on my page because that means you'll be able to see it clearly on the screen. But if you don't have white, then try something maybe a little bit softer like a yellow, or charcoal's perfect. Charcoal is probably the easiest thing to use. So you could use a thin stick of charcoal like this to draw up your grid, and it will come off a lot easier too. So when you want to get it off later with your kneadable eraser, it will lift off really well. Whereas the pastel tends to stick a little bit more. That's what it's designed to do, of course. But it's not quite as soft as charcoal. So sometimes it'll leave, see that little mark there? It's left a little stain, basically. So use a charcoal, stick of charcoal, ideally, if that's what you've got handy. I'll do this in white though, for the sake of the screen. So this is 23 by 30, this page. If you've got an A4 page, then just find your halfway marks. So we've got a line down the middle, and then we've got a line across the centre. And then we've also got quarter lines. So that would be 7.5 and 22.5 on this one, because it's 30. Should know this by now. So I've drawn up my lines, and then I'm just going to put them in with my ruler, because I do want to make sure that I get things in the right place. So it's actually important to do this when you're doing drawings, especially if something's got proportions or perspective. It really does help. It's very, very useful. It's a great strategy for drawing. Probably my favourite. I've tried a few different ways, but I like this the best. Okay. So if you've got that drawn up now, let's put a bit more light on my page. Then we can do exactly what we did before and mark in main shapes. So we've got that brow shape that comes from up here, crosses over about there, and comes off the page about there. So it's just about joining the dots again, doing that beautiful circular kind of edge on there. Don't press too hard. You don't need to press very hard for this part. You just need to press lightly, just to give yourself a little guide. That's all. Lovely. And then we've got the inside shape that comes through here, down there, and off across to about there. So that's those white feathers that sit on the cheek, just inside of those sides. And then we can put in the little cheek kind of shape through here. So we've got to put some dark into that in behind the cheek area later on. So that's that little round shape there. When you can look at something and break it into shapes, it's a really good skill to be able to have, because that way you actually become detached from what this is and you just start to see it all as shapes. And it really does help your drawing. So try not to think of things as eyes and noses and stuff, but just shapes, whether they're triangles or circles or what. So we're going to do the same thing with the eye. I'm going to mark in the inside line. So that's the inside line. I didn't talk about that earlier. Of the eye, which is the coloured section, so the orange eyeball bit. And then we can put the black outline around it after. So let's just look at the inside of the eye and where that comes to in relation to the grid. So if that's halfway, It's kind of an oval shape. It's not a perfectly round circle, so it's kind of flatter on the top and the bottom. Not a lot, but just enough to make it not a perfect circle. Perfect circle is in the pupil. So that is a perfect circle. Okay, so that's the orange part of the eyeball. And then I want to draw my pupil in. And like we said earlier, it sits a little bit higher at the top. Hits right on that middle line there. And then comes down. So what we want is a perfect circle. As perfect as you can get it anyway. Sometimes you might want to try using a compass or something to trace around. I'm just going to wing it. The lovely thing with pastels is you can kind of redo things a few times. So if you don't quite get it right the first time, you can just go over it. Okay, so that's good enough for the pupil for now. Then I'm going to just mark in that white area, so where all the white feathers are. That funny little shape around the eye. So it's got that funny little squarish shape at the top there, and then down the side of the eye, it's almost straight, and then wider at the bottom there, and then tapers off up into here. It's already looking like an owl, isn't it? Interesting. Okay, and that's probably about all we need to draw in at this stage. The next stage we can start to block in some lights and darks and colours. So I've been a bit slack today. I haven't picked up my colours yet, so I'm going to keep talking while I go and choose those. So if you want to start looking at your pastels and seeing what colours you'll be using for this, I'm just going to take my picture so I can do some colour matching. I like to hold my picture over my pastels and sort of try and find things that match. So what I can see in the eye is a lot of purple. There's a definite dark purple colour at the top of the eye, and that's where the shadow is. So I'm going to have a purple. I'm going to have a bright orange too, because that's in the eye, and I think that's just going to make it pop even more. So I've got orange, purple. I'm going to get a tanny coloured, what's that called? Sandstone sort of colour. That would be for some of those lighter feathers. And then underneath, I'm going to use my blue violet, my Flinders blue violet. So this is actually a dark, dark purple. It's nearly black. It's so beautiful. It's really nice for your darks. And then, of course, we want black for the eye and the rim of the eye. I don't use black very often. Try to kind of save it for last. It's a little bit like saving my light for last as well. And then I better put these in order of light to dark, so you can see what I'm talking about when I'm saying tone. So now I've got a couple of darks. I've got about 3 mids, which is good. And I think I want a cream and a white. So a cream to get all those lovely little bits of light feathers in, and then a white to get those really bright bits on at the end. So white and cream. So they're the colours I'll be using today. And I might pick up, actually I'm going to pick up a blue. Because blue and orange are complementary. And this owl has got a lot of orange in it. So if we use a little bit of blue, it's going to warm it up and make it a bit more interesting. So this is a ultramarine blue, beautiful blue. And we can pop a bit of that in the feathers and around the place. I'll show you how. I know my white pastel doesn't look white, but it actually is white under all that dirt. Pastels tend to pick up colour from each other, so they get very dirty if they roll around together for a while. You can see the creamy colour there. Maybe it's a bit light, that cream. No, that'll be fine. Australian grey is a really nice creamy colour too, if you can get your hands on some of that. I think it's the same as this. It's just a nice light colour, and it's not too. There's one. I have a whole one with its name still on, so I do know what that's called. That's Australian grey. It's a art spectrum. You can see the name there. See, it's got the same kind of tones as that creamy colour there. The reason I like using that is I actually use that as my light. Or I will in this instance. So we'll use those cream colours for the light feathers, and then at the very end, just put a few little white ones on, and that's how you get that beautiful depth and shine and brightness. So I have a saying, I like to save my white for last, which means don't touch that till you get to the end. And I also like to save my black for last if I have to use it. So it's almost like I give myself a little bit of freedom, knowing I can add more brights or more darks if I need to. So it's kind of fun. Okay, so that's our little palette. So you can see that I've put that down there in order from light to dark. And it's really important to make sure that you have that tonal range when you're doing some art. You really want to make sure that you've got, you know, enough darks and enough lights, or at least one of each, and then all the mid-tones. The mids will support the lights and the darks. This is blue violet. So I know it looks black, but it's actually a really deep dark purple. It's my favourite dark. All right, so now I've got all that there. I'm also going to keep my charcoal handy because charcoal and pastels work really nicely together. So if we need to do some fine lines, or, you know, I want it like a more grey rather than a black, I can use my charcoal. And it's also small, so I can do smaller work with that. So charcoal is always great with pastel too. Once you've got your palette sorted out, you might want to pop them all next to you. I've just got them here on a little towel. If you want to keep them in order of tone, that's always helpful. And you think, oh, I need a dark one there, and then you've got your pastels all lined up. It's easy then to find your darks. Put your white and your black away, or not away, but sort of off to the side for now, because we'll use those last. Well, maybe we won't. We might use them in the middle. We'll see how we go. So first thing we're going to do is block in all the dark areas. So when you look at your picture, and I'll just bring the colour one back over. So when you look at this picture, it's the same as what we did before with the black and white. Just got to find your dark bits. So we've got dark up here above the eye. We've got dark around the eye and on the top of the eye. And there's dark here under this little nose or cheekbone area. There's also a fair bit of dark around the edges here. And we can put a little bit of that down, and then we can layer the mid and light colours over those to build up those feathers. And we've got some dark up in there too in the brow. So let's just block in some of the darks. When I say block in, I mean drop your piece of pastel on your page, or hold it if you're on an easel, and use the side of it. So this is quite a long piece. It's probably a little bit too big. I might go get a smaller one. You'll find the full size sticks are always a bit too big if you're going to do blending like this. So I like to have little shorter bits like that one. That way I can get into smaller areas but still kind of leave it lying down on its side. So we're just going to wipe this over the paper, just lightly. Don't press too hard because you don't want to put too much down just yet. And put it where you can see some dark. There's lots of dark up here above the eye and some up in the top right corner. And then I'm going to do that kind of feathery movement again and just swing down the side here. See, I want to build up that beautiful texture. And knowing that we're going to go over this later with more colours and thicken up the feathers. This is just the first layer, first coat, basically. We just need to get some of that down on the paper so we can kind of mix it all in to the other feathers afterwards. Okay, where else is there dark? In here. So just inside under the cheek there, and at the end we'll put some really nice little white feathery marks over the top of those, and so that will send this dark area off into the distance further away at the back. Up in the top here in the forehead, so we've got some dark feathers up in there, so I'm going to put a bit of this up in there too. Again, remembering what the shape is, or the design of these feathers, so that we get that little short, stumpy, feathery feel. And then around the eye, so the eye is quite dark on the outline, isn't it? We just want to smush a bit of this down through there, like that. And you don't need to use a lot. This if you have blue violet, this Flinders blue violet, it's really quite soft and it marks the paper really easily. So don't use too much. The other thing I want to do is pop a little bit of this just across the top of the eye where that shadow is. We'll use black to do the outline of the eye. And I want to put a bit of that across there because that's that shadowy colour. Purple's beautiful. This violet, or any purple, is really lovely for shadows. So we just want to get a little bit of colour onto the paper at this stage. Once we've got that down on there, we're going to start to push it in. So pushing it in means that we're blending it into the paper. So doing that will allow the paper to kind of grip onto the pigment or the colour, and it sticks to the paper better. So we're actually going to build the background by doing this. And as I'm pushing it in like this, I'm making sure that I push it or pull it around in the direction that the feathers grow, because that's going to help to build up this beautiful texture of the feathers. So see how I'm pulling it from the eye out to the edge, so it looks like it's fanning out from the eye, and it's getting nicely pushed into the paper. So it's starting to get a little softer. It's not quite as dark once we've pushed it in, but we're getting all these beautiful shadows. It's just delicious. And where I've put more pigment down, so up here above the eye where it is quite dark, I put more down on there, so that's now a bit darker. So you can see already, just by pulling that around in the direction that the feathers grow, letting some of my paper colour show through too. So that's kind of giving it already a feeling of body and depth. Pull it around the eye. So remember, just pull it in the direction that it's growing in, because we want all these little feathers to start forming these patterns and growing in the right direction. And don't push too hard. So depending on how much pastel you put down on the page, I didn't put very much down, but I know if I keep pushing it around and blending it, it'll sort of get all pushed in and start to look a bit flat. So what I want to try and do is keep some of it not quite so blended. And you can see, just wanted to point out to you the grid marks. You can see how they're showing through, because I pressed quite hard. I wanted you to be able to see them on the screen. But because I did that, I can still see them through my one layer. A few layers, it should be fine. But just be aware of that. If you wanted to remove your grid marks, so once you've got your picture in place, like we've got now, you could use your kneadable eraser and take out some of those grid lines like this, hopefully, and that will then stop them from showing through. Sometimes they don't come off completely. It depends on how hard you press, and pastel pencil will be harder to remove than charcoal. I can still see that, but I know I'll be able to cover it up with the feathers. But yeah, sometimes you might want to remove that grid mark just because it's a bit annoying and distracting after a while. Okay, So now we've got that going on in there. I feel like I just need to change the shape of this a little bit. Just going to make that slightly darker and less humpy. There we go. So just keep reassessing your shapes. Keep checking back at your picture all the time. If you have your picture next to you, you can refer back to it all the time and just keep checking all the time. You should technically spend more time looking at your reference photo than you do looking at your artwork. That's what I was told anyway. You'll also find you get very dirty fingers. So this is just from one colour. And if you have a little hand towel nearby, I have one here. I won't show you because it's filthy, but one end is wet and one end is dry. So you can wipe your fingers reasonably clean off on the wet end and then dry them off before you touch your pastels. It's not entirely clean, but it'll do. It will do. And then we're going to get up into this forehead area and start to push the feathers around in there. And I'm doing short little up and down kind of movements because that's the direction they're growing in, isn't it? So if I do that, it will give me a really good foundation to build that layer of feathers onto. And the last place we want to blend in or merge is this shadow across the eye. So what I'm doing there is pulling it in the shape of the eye, okay? Because I want this to be smooth, and pull it across in that direction so that it starts to get that lovely rounded feeling across the eye. So that's blocking in with our dark at this point. Next thing we want to do is, I think we might do the eye actually. We'll focus on that first and then we'll move out from there. The reason for that is because the eye is kind of behind the feathers. So when I'm doing pastels, I like to work in order from back to front, or what's underneath to what's in front. That way you don't need to get in behind something later on if you've already done it. Do you know what I mean? So it's like working in some sort of sequence. It makes life a whole lot easier for yourself as well. So if we do the eye, and then we can kind of work out from there, because we've got these little feathers that sit across the top of the eye here on the brow, just very slightly, but we'll have little feathers there. And all these other little ones are popping out from around the eye. So if we get the eye done, then we can move on. So let's do that. First thing we want to do though, because the iris is not underneath but around the pupil, let's put the iris in first. So I've got this beautiful bright orange. Now you might not have an orange that's quite this bright. It's actually one of the hardest colours to get in a really bright colour. So just use whatever orange you have. If you don't have an orange, or an orange that you're happy with, you can always try red and then add yellow to it. So red and yellow make orange. And the fun thing about pastels is you can mix them on the page. So you don't have, you don't need palettes and water and all that business. You actually mix your colours on the page. So as I said, if you don't have a nice bright orange, then maybe you've got a red or a deep orange that you can add a bit of yellow to brighten it up a little bit. And what I've done is I've put my bright orange around the bottom and sides of this eye and kind of let it sort of waft off a little bit as it gets up towards the top, because that's where the shadow is. So I don't want to make that super bright because that's where my purple is, and we'll have to put that back in, of course, because that was just the foundation. Once you've got some orange on your page, and then I'm actually going to put a little bit of purple just around where the pupil's going to go. Can you see around there? It's got this strange little shadow kind of colour. So if we pop a bit of that around there. So this is the purple, not my darkest blue violet, but my other purple that I picked up. And now, once you've got that in there, do the same thing and kind of just pull your finger around in the shape of the eye. So nice big round sweeping movements from top down, under, up to the top and back. And I'm not quite meeting in the middle at the top there. Oh, yeah. Don't worry about the edges, we'll get the black around those and tidy them up. So that's a lovely big bright orange eye. Nice. Okay, I've got a big orange finger now. So that you'll find that the more you blend, so if I kept blending this like this, I'm pushing that dark colour in around the top now. See how it gets kind of muddy and dull? And that's okay, I actually want it to do that because that's what's going on in this picture. But with pastels, the more you push it in, the kind of muddier and duller it gets. So if you want your colours to be super bright, really vibrant, then what you want to do is just lay colour over the top like this. Once you've blended in one layer, I can now put this orange down over the top. And because I've got a textured paper, it's sort of got this really interesting, gritty kind of texture. And that sort of works for the eye, I think, because it gives me that feeling of there's a few different tones of colour in there. And so I can just let the paper do the work and show the texture. And then I would want to leave that sitting on the surface like that. So if you want a beautiful, bright, translucent colour, just let it sit like that over your previous layer. And that way, it'll kind of shimmer on the surface. And that's the lovely thing about pastels is you can create all these beautiful layers of things and, you know, build them up and then have this, what they call glazing in oil paints. It's just layering all the beautiful colours over, and some are more translucent than others. And so you can kind of see the colours underneath as well as what's on top. So that's quite lovely. You could technically, if you wanted to, you could add, you know, like run a yellow over there or something just to give it a bit more shine. Now I've said that I want to do it. I'll go and find a yellow. Hang on. Okay, I found this one. So this is an extra soft Art Spectrum yellow seed. And these guys sell pastels in sets, so you can actually buy a yellow set. You get about 8 different shades of yellow and purples and blues and everything. Make sure, if you're going to do this, make sure that the pastel you use is clean. So see the end of that, it's not clean, it's got red or something on it. So you've got to wipe that off onto a bit of paper towel or a cloth or something. So make sure it's nice and clean and pure. And there's no other pastel pigment on it. And then I'm just going to look at the picture and think, okay, so it's actually lighter or brighter, just on this bottom left bit. So see how I'm just running it over there like that. And it's sort of picking up the texture of the paper and putting a little bit of shine in there. That's nice. And that's all I want to do. So that's another example of layering or glazing. You get that beautiful shine, and you can still see the orange underneath, but it's got this lovely yellow layer over the top. So I'm going to leave that like that because I like that. It's lovely. Lovely, lovely. All right. Now, what I want to do is get back up into this eyelid and darken it off. So I'm going to get my purple again. This is my mid purple, not my darkest. And see what happens when I put this, a bit more of this in here. You can see there's a definite shadow of the eyelid across the top there. And we might need to darken that off yet. I don't know. I'm just going to push that in and see. When you push purple and orange together, they make the most glorious, muddy, dirty browns. So nice. Okay. I think that needs to be a tad darker up in this section. So I'm going to darken this up a little bit with some purple. Can you see how the top of the eye is much darker than the bottom? And that's because it's in shadow. So I'm just going to gently push that around. I'm not worried about the middle bit where we've got to put the pupil yet because we'll go over that and clean it all up. So don't worry if you go outside the lines or smudge it or anything. Yeah, definitely need more blue violet in there. There's that one. So this is my dark blue violet. Remember that one? That's what we used to block the darks in before. So I'm going to put that in here because I want to get that shadow of the eyelid nice and dark. That's better. And we'll put the black ring around it in a minute. So that's going to create a really nice little shadow across there. And then off to the left, it sort of fades off and it's not as a defined line. So your hard line is more across here on the right side. And then over this side, it sort of softens and disappears a little bit. Cool. Okay, so now we've done that part. If you're happy with how your iris is looking, you might want to add a bit of colour or maybe a bit more shadow around the centre where the pupil is, you know, around the edges there. But if you're happy with what you've got going on, then we can start to work with the black and put the pupil in. So I know I said I wasn't going to use black till the last bit, but we need to do this bit now. I'll change my mind again. So now you want to be fairly careful about drawing a circle in here. So try to remember where the circle was when you drew it in first. If you've still got some grid marks showing on your page, you'll be able to sort of find it a bit easier. Remember, it sits up a little higher, so there's more iris in the eye at the bottom than the top, and most of that kind of disappears up in the shadow. So I've got my black line around that. I'm just going to fill that in nicely with my black pastel. It's not quite round enough. If you have a pastel pencil, or even use your charcoal if you're having trouble, like this, just to get that edge round. Now I've got a little bit of dust on my page, but I can tip that off in a minute. What I'm going to do is push this black into my paper so I'm getting a nice black pupil. That's also leaving quite a bit of loose dust around the edges, but I can tip it off. Pushing that in like that. Why do we want a really black pupil? So that when we put that bright little bit of light in there, it's going to pop. Just smudging this edge a little bit. See, the edge of the pupil looks a little bit kind of blurry. So I can blur that off a tiny bit around the edges. Push some of that dark out into the orange. Now that's just loose dust, so I'm going to tip that off onto my little towel over here. Try not to blow it off if you're indoors because it does tend to get everywhere. Okay. Then if you've still got some dust hanging around like that, you can either gently push it in or try and get it off. You can kind of rub it around with your kneadable eraser. So they do lots of different things, these erasers. They blend and remove and clean your fingers and do all sorts of stuff. So they're pretty cool. I'm just going to leave it like that for now. Lovely. That will do. And then we can put the shine in later. I like to save that bit for last. I'm also going to darken up this shadow again. So I really like darks. You might not, but I really love darks because then my lights shine. So just thinking about how can we get this eye to really pop later once we get everything in, and that is to darken the dark bits off so that the lights will just bounce off it. A bit more purple in there. Purple's beautiful for shadows, so if you're ever looking for shadow colours, pick up your purples. They're just lovely for shadows. Pushing that through there. So remember, I said at the top of the eye is darker. and the bottom sections. I'm just kind of merging those a little bit more together. That'll do for now. And then we want to do the outline. So again, if you don't have a pastel pencil, you might want to use your charcoal. So you need to get a fairly hard line around here. So remember, the top kind of disappears up into all that dark feather, and then as we come around, it gets wider on the sides of this line. So you want to draw your circle in first, and charcoal is probably quite good for this because it's not too dark. Okay, and then I need a thicker line on the right side. So it makes it look a bit more oval because it's wider on the right and on the left. So on the left side, it kind of comes down into a little tear duct sort of shape. And draw those in with my charcoal. See that dark mark against the really bright orange just makes it sing, doesn't it? It's nice. Look at that eye. It's just powerful now. I can't wait to put the shine on. Do it later. Okay. So now we've got this nice rim around the eye. As I said, if you've got a pastel pencil, use that. I'm just going to tip off the dust. Or you might have a smaller pastel stick, like a harder stick that you can get a nice sharp edge on. This is my black pastel, and it is a bit blacker than the charcoal, but I think that will do for now. You can see on the rim of it, actually at the bottom here, there's a very slight little bit of light just across the bottom of the rim of the eye. So that'll be the light reflecting off there. You have to look pretty closely, but it is there. And that's another little thing that will help to bring this to life. So tip my dust off again. All right. So now it's time just to reassess everything. Look at the eye, make sure you've got the shape right, you're happy with how it's all sitting, and you like the colour, you don't need to do anything else to it. But you can always come back and do other things. It's just easier if you do it now rather than later on. I think that's fine. Not quite round enough at the bottom of it. You can always come back with your bright orange or whatever you used and sharpen up those edges a little bit more. And then, as I said before, we've got that, see that little shine on the rim of the eye there? I'm just using my white pencil, but if you've got a little bit of a white, the edge of a white pastel or something, just going to put a little line through it. It's very, very light. You can hardly see it. It just makes all the difference. So it's noticing those tiny details that will bring your art to life. Those little tiny bits of shine. Okay. My pupil needs to be slightly bigger. Just had a car accident then. We've got the freeway just over the road. There's this huge squeal of brakes and bump. Oh, it's nasty, isn't it? Hope they're okay. All right. There we go. So that's looking okay. I think it needs to be a bit darker up in here again. So keep adding in my darks, darker, darker, darker. It just gives the eye this kind of mysterious feeling if you've got that little bit of shadow. I've just used a bit of black and then blue violet up in there just to darken up in there. Nice. All right, let's get stuck into these feathers. So we've got our darks blocked in around the feather area. Next thing I want to grab, I'm going to get a bit of the, this one. So this is my like a terracotta kind of colour. So this is sort of the mid-tone for the feathers. And I'm going to do the same movement. So remember we did this kind of thing before. So if we do that again, and I'm just using this on its side, this is a little square pastel. Pastels come in all different shapes and sizes. This is a Blue Earth brand, and you can get little sets of these. They're really lovely, they're so soft. So what I'm doing is just very lightly swishing that across the top of my paper like this. So what's happening is it's kind of letting the dark that I put down earlier show through, and then it's just kind of sitting over the top. So doing these little back and forth swishing lines. I'll just put some in my eye. Oh, I have to sort that out now. That's okay. The lovely thing is it's easy to sort out. So if you do make a mistake like that and put something in the wrong place, it's okay. It's really easy to fix. So back and forth, just running around, putting these light coloured feathers in here. See how that's already starting to look like it's got some texture. I don't know how I got a stripe through there. I must have stopped at the same spot each time. So that's another thing to look out for, is making patterns. It's really easy to do the same movement all the time and create the same kind of mark. And that's okay, but if you're working with something that's natural, like feathers or grass, you want to still try and keep it fairly random, keep the movements a little bit loose and random. So I'm just working my way around this space and doing these short little feathery marks around here. So what we're thinking about now is this is like layer 2. It's not the final layer, but it's definitely, you know, a layer of feathers that we're building up on. And so I'm thinking about when I come back over this section here, I'm going to be using my cream pastel and maybe a few more strokes of dark. And so that's going to come back over this one, or this layer. So it'll start to build up all the textures and things. So it's not the last layer. So don't feel like, oh goodness, you know, this isn't working out. It's actually about building up different layers and getting it nice and thick and lush. Cool, cool. And now I'm going to do the same up here in the forehead. So remember I said before, all these feathers up here are kind of shorter and fatter. So do little short fat movements. I know it takes a bit of practice. And depending on the size of your pastel and what your stick does, will give you different outcomes. But I'm just doing these short little, I don't know, dabby movements, I suppose. Do that kind of things. Because what I want to do is create those stumpy little feathers rather than the long, wispy ones. And then over the eye, see that section there over the eye? It just nearly comes over the top, doesn't it? Just there. These little feathers just sit over the top there. And so that's another nice little feature that looks a bit owlish. So we're starting to build up the layers and get this nice and thick and feathery. It's lovely. Right. And just for fun, I'm going to put some of this colour down here as well on this cheek section, because again we're going to build it up and we're going to put a more light feather over the top, but we need to have a bit of a foundation as well. And we've got that lovely dark section there that tells me that it's going off into the distance. Excellent. So the next thing we want to do is add another layer of feathers. So see how we're just kind of building them up and building them up slowly, slowly. But rather than put another brown in, I'm actually going to try some of this blue, because I think the blue would be really nice in there. And if you don't feel like using blue, then maybe you'd rather have it like a mid-brown, something in between the darkest that we used and the colour we just put down. So this is a mid colour, but it's a little bit darker than what we just had. Just want to put a bit of blue in there. I think it'll be fun. Try purple if you don't have a blue. It warms it up. It just makes it a bit more interesting. I'm only putting a few marks in, not too many, because I don't want it to turn into a blue owl. It will definitely give it a little bit of depth. Pop a little bit of the blue up into the forehead as well. So see short, sharp, little stumpy marks rather than long ones. Just keep referring back to your picture and looking at the shape of everything. The blue's nice, I think. Okay. So, but I don't want to overdo it, so you don't want to put too much crazy blue in there. I mean, up to you. You can do it in any colour you like. You don't have to do it in these browns. You know, any colour's fine as long as you get your tones right. So next thing I want to do is pop in some of my greens. What do I want to put more darks in? I might do another layer of dark actually, so let's do that. So grab your blue violet. This is the dark one we used at the beginning to block in on dark. And we're just going to do a similar sort of thing with this. So see, by doing this, we're building up those lovely thick layers. And then when we get some light in there, it's really going to pop on top of the dark. There is a lot of dark in there. And see, as we're building up the layers like this, starting to do sort of a few little shorter marks. So you can see those feathers around the right-hand side of the eye kind of crisscross over each other. So I'm starting to kind of look at that now and building up the feeling of that. And we'll do the same thing with the lighter pastels. Still just want to get a bit more dark in here so that we've got a nice foundation to add lights to. Again, following the pattern of the feathers, moving in the direction that they grow. You might want to use black if you feel like, you know, this blue violet or whatever your dark colour is. If that's not dark enough for you, then by all means pick up black or something else and try that. Black is such a strong tone. It's coming together nicely. When we get those light feathers in a second, that's when it'll start to really come alive. Just want to put a bit of this in the top of this cheek area. See on the top of that cheek, you can see there's shadow on there because it's heading off back behind what will be all the light feathers here in the front. And so what I want to do is just get that little bit of a shadow feeling just inside there, so that it looks like it's turning away from us and heading off underneath the feathers. All right, now let's get this cream going on. So this is my creamy colour. It's still not white, so we're going to save the white for last because that's when the fun begins. And let's get a bit of this cream into where you see little bits of white feathers. So I can see a few. They're not too bright up here in the forehead. I'm just going to press lightly and get a few of those little marks in there. That will hopefully start to look like an owl. Okay, and we've got all this lovely white feather around the eye area. We've left this area sort of empty. Now, the reason I leave it empty like that is so that there's nothing underneath to kind of contaminate my cream colour. Because I want to keep it fairly clean. So when you want to put a light colour down, and keep it really bright or light. Try not to put anything underneath it, like a layer of dark, like we've done everywhere else. If you want to keep it really bright, then it's best not to have anything underneath it. Just keep it pure. Okay, so that's quite bright, and we'll come back over that and soften off with the mid-tone in a minute. So same sort of thing, just whisk this around. And everyone's going to have different looking colours because we've all got different colours. So that's the interesting part. Everybody's got different coloured pastels and different kinds, and so we all end up with a different result. What I'm doing now is just gently putting some little white lines through here. Again, this is a square pastel, so I've got a nice sharp edge that I can use to get some finer lines. And by using the side of it, again, I'm not making a hard sort of single mark, but it's a lot softer. And you can kind of use the flat side of the pastel, if you have a flat side, to get a wider mark, if you want like bigger, softer feathers. And then to get those crispy little lines, you can use the edge of it. As I said before, pastels come in different shapes and sizes. And, you can kind of manipulate them in different ways to get different results. It's a little bit like a paintbrush, you know. You can use the edge to get a sharp line, or the side to get a wide. You can press hard to get dark colours, and you can press really lightly just to get a very soft glaze. Cool. So I'm kind of just working my way around this guy, putting in where I can see light feathers. And again, just looking at the shapes of them. Remember, we've still got white to go, so this is not our lightest. So you can use it, you know, where you see a few of the little highlights in light areas. I'm going to do the little cheek area. So the cheek feathers are interesting. They're sort of a little bit kind of messy, don't they? What I'm trying to do is sort of leave some of this purpley colour where I put that down for the shadow, and not press quite so hard with my light pastel, so that it tries to get that kind of shadow effect. And then do these kind of messy different angles for the feathers on that front bit there. There we go. So remember though, to try and, I didn't do it in the right order, but if you do this section first, get that kind of done, then we can bring these other feathers that come down over that, if that makes sense. So we want to do this area first so that we can put the other ones on top. We have to get back in behind them to do anything. I feel like I want to put some orange or something in there. I might have to go with that, just to kind of tie in the brightness of the eye. Now that's nice. So this is what I do. I get halfway through and think, ooh, let's try that. Just gives it a whole other feeling, and it warms it up a lot, I think. I like that it makes it warmer. The orange. And mixed with the blue underneath, it's quite nice. So you can't, I must remind, let you know too, you can't do this layering thing forever. There will come a point where the paper gets really full and you can't put any more on. And that often will depend on the kind of paper you're using, of course, but it'll also depend on the pastels. So if you're using a really creamy pastel, something that's quite buttery and fills the paper quickly, you won't be able to get too many layers on. Whereas if your pastel's a little bit drier and you've got a good grit paper, you can get a lot more on there. So it's variable. It just depends on, you know, the pastels and the paper and all those things. But there will come a point, because I am using some quite creamy sorts of pastels on this one, there'll come a point where I won't be able to get any more on there. So I'll have to stop. And then when you get to that stage, you can either stop and leave it, or you can give it a spray. So you can buy workable fixative, it's called, for pastel and charcoal. And I could spray this now with a couple of layers of that and leave it to dry, and then you can add more over the top. So fixative is great if you want to keep adding, you know, layer on layer on layer. So some people, I don't want to say this out too loud, but some people use hairspray and think it's great. It's probably fine, but if you want to use, you know, acid-free art materials, in case, you know, what if you want to frame this and hang it and stuff? You don't really want to be putting hairspray on it, even though that does work, I believe. I haven't tried it. But, I had someone in the shop the other day who does pastels, and she swears by it. So there you go. I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying that's what could happen. But, you know, if you don't have fixative handy and you're just doing a bit of a practice thing and you want to see how it works, then, you know, try the hairspray and just see what it does. But it will definitely kind of fix one layer, so then you can keep adding to your layers. I've just picked up my dark again, my blue violet again. I feel like I want to add a little bit more dark, and then I'm going to throw some more light on. So as I said, this is getting pretty full now, and I won't be able to get much more on. And you'll know because it just won't stick. It kind of just glides over the top and won't leave the colour on the paper. I probably should stop doing that. And I'm just going to tip off some dust. Got a lot of dust gathered on there. Come back. All right, let's get some light in here. So I'm going to pick up my cream again. This is the cream I used before, and start to really get some of these beautiful lights going on in these feathers here. So I'm still saving my white for last. That will be for just a few little highlights. But this, see how this just sits over that beautiful dark section there and really starts to come forward. Lovely. There's short little feathers around the inside of the eye there. I kind of didn't really get them in properly. But then if you come across here with your light and just do these beautiful sweeping kind of movements, and get that lovely feathery look coming out. Try to keep your marks fairly random. You don't want to make a fence, the same height and same size and everything. So try to keep it sort of loose and fairly random, or natural looking, I should say. And then up in here, so I've got a little bit of light just here on the brow. See how that's coming alive now, because we're putting some beautiful lights in there. And add a bit more light down here on the cheek, on the surface. So what I'm imagining is there's a light shining on this guy, and it's sort of above him, I think. So if it's above, then all the bits of feathers that are poking out or closer to us are going to be catching the light, because that's the direction that it's coming from. It's always good to think about the direction of the light. I'm just noticing where that is. So now I'm going to put a few more in around the eye here, just to freshen those up and make them a little bit brighter and spots. Using the edge of my pastel, I'm getting a finer line, so it's starting to be a little bit more refined and not so chunky. Coming out around that. Might have to tidy up the edge of my eye with my black afterwards. So I've kind of run over it a few times. Okay. So nearly there. A few more up in here. And then we've got to put our shine in the eye, which is the fun bit. Okay, so I think we're just about there. And we'll just do a few more little light bits up in here. So what I'm doing now is I'm looking at the picture and I'm just finding where else do I need to add a little bit of light. This pastel is lovely, it's so creamy. I think it's also an Art Spectrum Extra Soft, I swear. So now I'm just going to clean up the edge of my eye lid. I'm going to use my charcoal. I just want to make sure that that stays nice and kind of sharp. Even though in the picture we've got little hairs kind of growing out of the edges there, still want to just make sure that they don't leak over into the eye too much. That's looking pretty strong. So I've got the edges of my eye nice and tidy and as sharp as we can get them. You will find with pastels it's tricky to get a really sharp edge. So if you're into fine lines and very, very fine detail, it'll be a challenge. Not impossible, but it will be a challenge. I'm just going to darken up in here a little bit. Darken off my pupil a bit more, get some more black in there. And then we're ready to put the light in. So I probably could have used a different brand. But anyway, it is what it is, and everyone's will be different because we've all got different colours. So let's pop some light into this eye. I'm going to use my white. So when we do it, something like the light in the eye, you don't want to kind of draw it in and keep rubbing. With pastels, you just want to push it on and then lift off lightly. So see we've got that really bright shine just there. I'm going to push it on. What I want to do is kind of leave crumbs on the page like that. See how bright white that is? Because I haven't blended it or rubbed it or done anything. So you can get a really bright, shiny bit like that. And then because we have a not so bright, shiny bit on there as well, I'm just going to pull it across lightly and do a soft little wipe on there. So try not to stick your fingers in here because once you do, it just goes sort of dirty and muddy. So that will be a good little shine. And then there's another little one just off the side here. So that one's not as bright. So I can kind of press a little lighter and just wipe that across there like that. So have a practice. It's a bit tricky sometimes, but you really just want to push it on and then lift off. And try not to stick your fingers in there. I so want to. I'm not sticking my fingers into pastels, but I won't resist the urge. And hopefully that will give you a nice little shine on your eye and bring it to life. And if you feel like you need to add that shine around the eye lid or rim of the eye again, so I've just got my little white pencil, just putting a tiny little line around there. And see how that just gives it that 3D look, it just gives it that little shine. So it looks like it's kind of curling around and it's a solid object. I know that edges of my eye here are a bit blurry. I'm not a bit dusty there. So pencil to clean that up. I think that's about it for our owl. And then finally, we've got white. You've done your little bit of shine, and then it's time just to let your eyes wander around your picture and just choose maybe 3 places where you can pop a bit of white. So that's going to be where the highlights of the feathers are. Really bright little bits of light, or where it's catching the light. So I feel like down in here could do with a bit of white. So just a few light white marks in there. It's not very different to the cream, but it's just enough to give it a little bit of a shine and a glow. And then we can put a bit up here. And as I said, I'm getting quite full on here, so it's not letting me, see how it's not staying white, it's kind of going grey, because what's happening is there's a lot of pastel on my page. And instead of letting the pastel sit on the page, it's kind of blending with everything underneath it. So it's not quite as white as I could get it, where it's thicker. It should work down here, because I don't have as much pastel in this section. I'll put a bit of white in here, just in a couple of spots. You don't want to overdo it. I think that might be it for today. So there's our little owl. Hope you really enjoyed that. It's a fun class to do this one, and it's something you could actually keep, kind of playing with if you wanted to. So if you had some fixing, you could give that a little spray and keep building up those layers of feathers, because it's lots of fun. You could try other colours, for instance, some red or purple would be fun in there. And you can even have a bit more of a play in the eye and mix up some colours in there and see what you can do. But it's a good little exercise to do, and everybody loves doing the owl eye. So if you're watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it. Please do send through your photos of your artwork. I really love to see what everybody's been doing, and I'm happy to pop them into my newsletter. And I'd love to hear your feedback too. So if you have, comments or something that was bothering you that you wanted to let me know about, or if you really loved it, then I'd love to hear from you. So don't hesitate to do that, and have a fabulous day.